Silence is often misunderstood as weakness, but in the realm of faith it becomes a spiritual strategy crafted by God Himself, a divine instruction that positions you for victory even when nothing around you seems to make sense. When God whispers, "Stay silent," He isn't asking you to retreat. He is inviting you into a higher level of trust where your stillness becomes a weapon the enemy cannot interpret or intercept. There are moments when speaking too soon can sabotage what God is building behind the scenes, so He calls you into quietness to protect the work He began in your spirit. Silence is not inactivity. It is obedience, a deliberate choice to hold your peace while God unfolds His plan step by step. Kenneth E. Hagin often emphasized that faith is not proven by noise, but by steady confidence that does not need constant verbal reassurance. Your silence becomes evidence that you understand God is in control, even when your emotions are urging you to react. When you stay silent in obedience, your spirit gains strength as it listens more closely to God instead of the chaos surrounding you. Silence becomes a refuge where your heart resets, your faith anchors deeper, and your perspective aligns with heaven. God uses these silent moments to prepare your spirit for what your voice will eventually declare with authority and power. There are battles God never intended you to fight with arguments, explanations, or emotional responses, and He shields you from unnecessary conflict by asking you to remain silent. Silence becomes a wall that protects your peace, allowing God to deal with situations in ways your words never could. When you choose silence under God's direction, you demonstrate maturity, willingness to let Him handle what is beyond your control. Hagin taught that faith works when you refuse to be moved by what you see or hear, and silence reinforces that immovable stance. Stillness is a declaration that you trust God's timing more than your impulses, that you value His wisdom above your own understanding. The enemy expects you to react, to speak out of frustration or fear, but your silence confuses him because it reveals your reliance on God instead of your circumstances. In that sacred quiet, God strengthens your spiritual backbone, teaching you to respond from a place of victory rather than emotion. Every moment you stay silent in faith becomes a seed planted into the unseen realm, preparing a harvest that will manifest in God's perfect timing. Silence is not losing the battle. It is stepping aside so God can win it for you. When God instructs you to stay silent, He is often positioning you for a breakthrough that noise could delay or destroy, because silence allows Him to move without interference. Your silence becomes a shield that prevents the enemy from reading your next move and guards the miracles God is forming in the hidden places of your life. Hagin often taught that spiritual victories are secured long before they appear, and silence is one of the tools God uses to solidify your victory before it manifests. In moments of silence, your faith matures, your discernment sharpens, and your dependence on God deepens in ways that loud striving can never accomplish. Silence invites the presence of God to fill your heart with assurance, reminding you that you don't have to defend yourself or force outcomes. He is already working things together for your good. While others may misunderstand your quietness, heaven recognizes it as obedience, strength, and trust. God uses your silence to align circumstances, soften hearts, and remove obstacles that your words might have stirred up. As you remain silent under His instruction, you begin to see that silence is not the absence of action, but the presence of divine strategy. Your stillness becomes a testimony of your faith, revealing that you trust God enough to let Him speak, act, and fight on your behalf. Trust begins where human understanding ends, and this is the foundation of walking by faith rather than sight, stepping into a realm where God's voice matters more than your logic, your experiences, or the opinions that surround you. When God says, "Trust me," He is calling you to release the need to figure everything out and embrace the certainty that His wisdom surpasses every limitation of the natural mind. Kenneth E. Hagin often taught that faith operates in the unseen, and trusting God means you must be willing to lean on what He has spoken rather than what you can calculate or comprehend. Human understanding seeks clarity, but faith seeks God's heart, knowing that His plan is already perfected even when the pathway appears confusing or incomplete. Trust requires surrender, a willingness to lay down your fears and refuse to let uncertainty dictate your attitude or actions. When you trust God beyond your understanding, you enter a supernatural peace that anchors your soul and quiets the storms around you. Trust becomes a posture, a spiritual stance that refuses to waver even when challenges intensify or circumstances grow darker. Your willingness to depend on God in moments that defy logic becomes the very evidence of your faith maturing. This kind of trust transforms your walk with God from surface belief into deep, unshakable confidence that He is guiding every step you take. Faith does not demand that you understand everything. It only requires that you believe God is who He said He is, and that His promises stand firm regardless of temporary obstacles. When God calls you to trust Him, He is inviting you to step beyond emotional reactions and intellectual limitations into a faith-driven way of living that sees His truth as more real than your fears. Hagin taught that the Word of God is the highest form of reality, and trusting God means accepting His Word as final authority even when circumstances contradict it. Human reasoning often tries to convince you to rely on your own strength, but trust pulls you back into alignment with God's power rather than your own abilities. Trust is choosing God's direction even when the path seems unclear, choosing His timing even when delays feel uncomfortable, and choosing His voice even when other voices demand your attention. In moments when life pushes you toward anxiety or overthinking, trust becomes the spiritual anchor that keeps your heart steady and your decisions rooted in faith. God intentionally allows you to reach places where your understanding fails so that you can discover the depth of His faithfulness. Trusting Him in those moments becomes an act of worship, a declaration that His perspective is greater than your perception. When you choose to trust God beyond your understanding, you step into the realm where miracles begin to unfold. Trusting God requires a willingness to walk by the Spirit, allowing His leading to outweigh the pressure of circumstances, because true faith is not based on visible evidence, but on the character of the one who promised. Human understanding looks for patterns, explanations, and predictable outcomes, but trust embraces the mystery of God's process, knowing that He sees the full picture you cannot. Hagin often reminded believers that faith begins when you know the will of God, and once His will is revealed, your responsibility is to trust Him without wavering. Trust is not passive. It is an active decision to depend on God moment by moment, to choose assurance over anxiety, and to hold onto His Word even when your surroundings tell a different story. The more you trust God beyond what you understand, the more your spiritual sensitivity grows, allowing you to hear His guidance with greater clarity. Trust opens the door for God to reveal His strength, His timing, and His supernatural intervention in ways your intellect could never predict. When you trust Him fully, you stop striving to control outcomes and start resting in the knowledge that He is orchestrating every detail for your benefit. Trusting God beyond your understanding reshapes your mindset, deepens your faith, and positions you to experience His power in ways that transform your entire life. When God calls you into silence, He is inviting you into the unseen realm where His greatest works are formed long before they ever become visible, because what He prepares in secret often carries the most power. In silence, God is aligning circumstances, shifting hearts, and arranging divine connections that your natural eyes cannot detect. Kenneth E. Hagin often taught that God moves first in the spiritual realm, and what manifests in the natural is merely the result of what has already been accomplished behind the scenes. Silence becomes the atmosphere where God molds your spirit, strengthens your faith, and tunes your heart to recognize His movement. In the quiet moments, you learn to discern His whispers more clearly, because the absence of noise allows His direction to rise above every distraction. While you may feel still or hidden, God is actively shaping the outcome, protecting you from premature exposure to things not yet ready. The silence is not a delay, but a preparation, a divine incubation period where miracles take form away from the eyes of doubt. God uses these silent seasons to strip away fear, refine your motives, and increase your dependence on Him. What looks like inactivity is actually God working in depths too profound for human eyes to see. Silence is the place where God performs His most delicate work, crafting breakthroughs that require careful timing and perfect alignment, so they cannot be disrupted by external forces. When God asks you to stay silent, He is often shielding you from speaking prematurely, because words spoken too soon can interfere with the divine process unfolding. Hagin emphasized that the spiritual realm is sensitive, and there are moments when silence protects what God is developing, so the enemy cannot intercept or undermine it. Your silence becomes a barrier that guards your promises while God finalizes the work behind the curtain of the unseen. As you remain silent, God removes obstacles you never knew existed and opens doors you did not even realize were locked. In silence, your spirit becomes more receptive, your intuition sharper, and your connection to the Holy Spirit stronger. God works in the stillness because it allows Him to position everything with precision, ensuring that when the moment comes to reveal His work, it is undeniable. Silence also keeps you aligned with His pace, preventing you from rushing ahead of His plan or lagging behind in hesitation. As God moves behind the scenes, your role becomes simply to trust, wait, and listen with a heart anchored in faith. The unseen work of God during silent seasons becomes the foundation for victories that appear sudden, but were actually shaped over time through His invisible hand. Hagin frequently reminded believers that God is never inactive. He is always working, even when you cannot see evidence of movement. Silence grants Him room to orchestrate outcomes without the interference of your worries, opinions, or attempts to control the process. As you stay silent, God is connecting pieces, aligning people, and preparing solutions in ways your mind could never conceive. Silence becomes a sacred space where God's supernatural order replaces human confusion, allowing His perfect timing to unfold unhindered. In those quiet moments, He is preparing your heart to carry the blessing, strengthening your faith so you're ready for what He is bringing into your life. The breakthroughs that follow a season of silence are often greater and more complete because God took the time to perfect them before revealing them to you. Your silence is evidence of trust, and your trust gives God room to release blessings that require a quiet foundation. As God works behind the scenes, silence becomes the bridge between the promise and its manifestation, ensuring that when the answer comes, it is exactly what He designed and perfectly aligned with His purpose for your life. Your peace becomes the undeniable proof that God is in control, because when you choose to rest in Him instead of reacting to circumstances, you demonstrate a level of trust that goes beyond mere belief and enters the realm of spiritual confidence. Kenneth E. Hagin often taught that faith rests, and this rest is not laziness but a powerful expression of knowing that God has already taken responsibility for the outcome. In moments when everything around you is shifting, your peace becomes a testimony that you are anchored in something greater than the situation at hand. Peace is not the absence of problems. It is the presence of God overshadowing every fear, worry, and uncertainty that tries to steal your focus. When God tells you to remain silent and trust Him, He is offering you access to a supernatural calm that shields your heart from emotional storms. This peace reminds you that you don't need to fight for control or force solutions, because the one who holds the universe is holding your situation as well. Your heart becomes steady not because the path is easy, but because God is guiding every step you take. In that peace, you begin to recognize that God is not distant. He is actively working, leading, and protecting you. Your peace becomes the quiet declaration that God is not only present, but fully involved in every detail of your life. This peace becomes a spiritual weapon, disarming the enemy and silencing the voices that try to provoke fear, doubt, or insecurity, because peace is one of the clearest signs that God is at work on your behalf. Hagin emphasized that faith is not frantic. It does not panic or waver when circumstances become difficult. Instead, faith settles into a steady confidence that God is orchestrating every detail according to His perfect wisdom. When you walk in God's peace, you stop allowing external pressure to dictate your internal posture, and you begin responding from a place of spiritual stability rather than emotional chaos. This peace guards your heart, protects your mind, and keeps your spirit aligned with God's direction even when the world around you demands a reaction. In silence, that peace grows stronger because you are no longer feeding the noise that fuels anxiety. As you rest in God's presence, your trust deepens and your spirit becomes more aware of His guidance. Peace creates clarity, allowing you to hear God's voice above the distractions that try to confuse your decisions. This calmness is not accidental. It is the result of choosing to trust God's timing, God's plan, and God's power instead of leaning on your own understanding. Your peace becomes a sign not only to yourself, but to the spiritual realm that God has taken over the situation entirely. When you carry God's peace, you carry evidence that He is in control, and this evidence becomes a source of strength that shapes your outlook, your decisions, and your reactions. Hagin often affirmed that peace is the atmosphere of faith, the environment where miracles take place and divine direction flows freely. As you remain silent and rest in God's peace, you develop the inner stability needed to handle the breakthroughs and blessings He is preparing for you. Peace teaches you patience, reminding you that God's pace is perfect, even when it feels slow or unfamiliar. It steadies your emotions so you don't make choices out of fear or urgency, but from a place of God-led assurance. Peace becomes a daily reminder that God is fighting battles you cannot see and solving problems before they ever reach you. In that quiet confidence, you learn to surrender fully, acknowledging that God's hands are more capable than yours. As His peace fills your heart, you realize that nothing is slipping out of His control, and nothing is too complicated for His wisdom. Your peace becomes the living evidence that God is not only aware of your situation, but actively guiding it toward a victory designed specifically for you.